That'd be odd. Yeah, as soon as you talk, then the camera will move to you.
Yeah, we don't want to. We don't want to. So we need to be muted.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today, both in person and online. My name is Natalie Wasik. I'm the Associate Director with 7th Generation Interfaith, and we're very excited to have you all here for our annual conference today titled Working in Coalition to Uphold Fiduciary Duty. We have a great lineup of speakers, panelists, and a workshop for you all to participate in. So thank you again for joining us. I want to thank all of our sponsors, our board, our conference committee, all supporters financially and morally, as well as all of the hands that it took to put this conference together today. So thank you so much for joining, and I hope you all enjoy the conference and get a lot out of it. I want to introduce our board chair, Caroline Bowden, who will also do a quick welcome.
Thank you, Natalie. Yes, so good afternoon and welcome. As Natalie said, I'm Caroline Bowden, and I am the current board president for SGI. And on behalf of the board, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to SGI's 2025 annual conference. So I think this goes without saying, but much has changed since our conference last year, both for SGI as an organization, but also within the broader U.S. and international political landscape. And although the headwinds against the responsible investing community are significant at this moment, SGI and its members and its partners health disparities and human rights abuses as part of the fulfillment of fiduciary duty. We have, as Natalie said, a great lineup of speakers who will take us through the varying definitions and understandings of fiduciary duty and how we can work individually within our own organizations and collectively to continue to meet those obligations in alignment with our values and the goal of creating a more just and sustainable world for all. Before we begin, I also want to extend our appreciation and gratitude to our generous sponsors for contributing to this year's annual conference, to our members, both in the room and in the virtual room, to our board. I could not do what I do as the board president without the great participation and engagement from the rest of the board. And of course, to our amazing staff, both Chris and Natalie, for everything that you do for this organization and making this event possible. So with that, Natalie, I'm going to turn it back to you as our, I think, MC for the day. To Dan, and we will kick things off. So I think Dan's going to lead us in our reflection. Thank you and welcome, everybody.
God of wisdom, justice, and grace, we gather today as stewards entrusted with a weighty responsibility to act not for ourselves, but for those we serve, with integrity, accountability, and care. In this coalition, you have brought together many voices, many gifts. Remind us that unity does not require sameness, but a shared commitment to what is right, a shared burden of duty, and a shared hope for the future. May we listen with humility, speak with honesty, and decide with discernment. Guard us against pride or complacency, that we may never forget the sacred trust we hold on behalf of others. Teach us to be faithful in small things, courageous in hard things, and always mindful of the greater good. Bless this conference and coalition, not merely as a collection of people, but as a body with a shared purpose, to lead with justice, to govern with wisdom, and to serve with love. Amen.
Thank you so much, Dan and Caroline. I now want to invite Keith Johnson up to start our event. He will be kind of setting the stage for what we need to know about fiduciary duty before we get into a lively conversation with our panelists. And let me switch over to your slides.
All right, while Natalie's doing that, I'll just give you a little bit of background about who I am so you have a clue as to where I'm coming from talking about this stuff. I've spent almost 40 years in the legal and investment side of institutional investment. I'm a retired attorney. I'm not practicing anymore, so I can't give you legal advice. And that's a disclaimer that I have to give here. This is really just an educational effort, so to get you thinking about things and hopefully understanding a little bit more about why fiduciary duty is a good thing. So I spent most of my career at the State of Wisconsin Investment Board, which is the investment arm for the Wisconsin retirement system. Part of that is the chief legal counsel, where I was in charge of the corporate governance program, and also served a stint as the president of the National Association of Public Pension Attorneys. I then did a term of 16 years with Reinhard Berner Van Duren, which is just down the road here. I was in the Madison office, but we had a practice serving institutional investors. So that's the perspective that I kind of bring to this now. But what I think I would like to do, let me see what we've got up here on the slides, is okay, it's not doing anything. Sorry, I'm technologically challenged, so. Okay, I'll try that again this time. What I'd like to do today is to just provide sort of a quick run through at a high level of fiduciary principles. And I have to stress that I'm not what I called a mafia attorney, which is I'm not approaching this topic from the perspective of what you can get away with as a fiduciary, as a board member. I'm trying to approach it from the perspective of these fiduciary principles are basically developed over centuries. They're multicultural. Confucius, believe it or not, was really into fiduciary duty. And in the UK common law system, which is our legal system, basically, our history of fiduciary duties dates back to the Crusades, when people had to leave their homes to go and fight in the Crusades. They had to have somebody at home to take care of it. Oh, okay. Sorry. Thanks. And please, to the extent you have any questions, just, feel free to interrupt me. And the fiduciary duty best practice principles really provide guardrails for behavior of fiduciaries. There are lots of sources of fiduciary law and principles, and it gets fairly complicated. And as a result of that, I think it's really easy for fiduciary duty to be misused as a roadblock and mischaracterized. And I think we've been seeing an awful lot of that lately. And I'm going to try to address some of that. But first, let's just take a look at what the basic fiduciary duty principles are. These are the principles. We're only going to talk about the four on the left. And these are the ones that I think have been, to a certain extent, misrepresented and mischaracterized recently. What I'd like to do is to be able to focus on those and kind of give you a more holistic view of what fiduciary duty is about. So loyalty and prudence are the two concepts that get most of the airplay in discussions of fiduciary responsibilities. And the duty of loyalty essentially is intended to protect fund beneficiaries from theft, self-dealing, misuse, and favoritism. And it's the source of the exclusive benefit principle, which basically says that you can't use assets that are being held in trust as the assets of somebody else for a purpose other than what they were put in the trust for. And an observation that I think is worth noting is that that also means that you can't use trust assets to subsidize the carbon industry unless it's a good investment. The duty of prudence basically is, sometimes I refer to it as a standard of care, and it's intended to protect beneficiaries from negligence and misconduct by the agents who have been delegated the authority to control assets that are in the trust fund. Peer practices are a central focus of the standard of care, and that's the comparison that's usually used when you're deciding whether or not somebody is acting prudently or not. But there's a limit to that because it's not intended to be a one size fits all. There are different kinds of institutional investors that have different purposes, that have different authority, that have different stakeholders, and it's not intended to be something that prevents people from, when they're managing a trust fund asset, from considering new practices, although it's often used as an excuse to prevent people from doing something new that might threaten vested interests. So the other thing I want to stress about the duty of prudence basically is that it is process oriented and forward looking. Investments are not judged by themselves. They are judged as how they fit into the risk reward structure of the entire portfolio. And they're judged at the time of the decisions that are made to make the investments and the process that was used to analyze and make that decision. Doesn't matter if it turns out to have been a really bad idea, as long as there was a valid, prudent process that was used to make the decision. So these are the main fiduciary duties that you hear about, that when people are debating fiduciary duties, they're talking about loyalty and prudence. I want to focus on the things that seem to have gotten lost in the debate over the last few years. And this slide shows you what's missing. These are all traditional, well-known and accepted fiduciary duty principles, but the debates, as a matter of convenience for reaching conclusions that people would like to reach, often don't pay any attention to these. You rarely hear about them. So this is what I want to focus on today with you, because I think they really guide faith-based investors in a way that is, in some respects, I think, more central and different than it does some of the other investors that manage trust fund assets. So the duties are impartiality, and is most trust funds will have beneficiaries or participants that have conflicts between them. For instance, intergenerational conflicts is a really good one, which is very common. So younger participants in a fund will probably have a completely different tolerance level for risk and a different investment performance horizon than people that are in their 70s and 80s. Fiduciary duty of impartiality requires that the fiduciary sort of try to, in good faith, balance those interests. The investment time horizon balancing between liability streams and investment practices is sort of a follow-on principle to the duty of impartiality. And you rarely hear in current debates anything more than short-term investment return discussions. But fiduciary duty is all about, if you are managing long-term funds, you have to try to make a good faith effort to balance and think about the long-term consequences associated with what you're doing. There's also, in the duty of prudence, an obligation to investigate relevant facts. You can't just jump to conclusions. You can't accept an assertion from a politician or somebody else without actually engaging in a reasonable effort to verify that the facts are indeed true and accurate. And finally, the duty of care as the standard of prudence is an evolving dynamic concept. It's not stuck in one place. It changes and evolves in how it's interpreted and applied as our knowledge base changes and as the circumstances in which we live change. So I think these are the issues that are missing from the current debates. They're standard fiduciary duty principles, and restoring them to consideration, I think, would be really, really helpful, especially for faith-based investors. And again, there's no one-size-that-fits-all category. Nonprofit foundations also have a duty of obedience to mission, which allows them to have more of a values, mission-based approach to investing than just simply a value-based approach to investing. Same thing with faith-based investors. You have constitutional protections to exercise your faith beliefs, and that is really a unique advantage that you have over other types of fiduciaries. One of the things that's been happening lately is I think there's been some confusion over the different roles and perspectives that asset owners, the boards that are responsible for investments have, as opposed to the investment managers who may be investing a portion of the portfolio. You often hear one side of the political debate referring to the duty of loyalty as running to the plan, the inanimate, pool of assets, which is much more of an investment manager's perspective, because the investment managers, if they're only managing a portion of the portfolio under a mandate from the asset owner, they may not have the connection with the actual human beings whose money it is that's being managed. And I think that it's very important. ERISA, which governs private pension funds, for instance, does make a case. It states explicitly what's known from state common law, that the duty of loyalty is owed to the human beneficiaries, not to the inanimate plan. I think that that's something that fits with faith-based investors' religious beliefs and is a really important thing to remember in the current debates and mischaracterizations of what fiduciary duty means. So just a little bit more about what the standard of care being a dynamic concept means, basically. We have a really good example because in the last couple decades of the 20th century, there was a transition in the standard of care from being tied to what were called legal lists that were set forth in statutes and regulations. And by the way, they did not allow investment in public equities or private equities. It was basically real estate and bonds, fixed income. Well, it turned out that there was a fairly extended period of high inflation in which portfolios that were invested in just real estate and bonds underperformed portfolios that had exposure to public equities. So this was all in conjunction with a bit of research that was coming out and some theories that were coming out in finance around what was called modern portfolio theory. So we went through a time period which took a couple of decades actually to complete, where there was a transition from using legal lists to using modern portfolio, which looked at construction of a portfolio and how it fits, how individual investments fit into the overall structure of risk and rewards. You could have riskier assets over on one end of the portfolio balanced by less risky assets on another side of the portfolio. The law documents relating to sort of interpretation of the standard of care were modified back in the 1990s to try to put on the books the learning that came from that process. And that's what you see here on this slide, that trust investment law in the restatement of trusts. They put in some principles that say it should avoid repeating the mistake of freezing rules against future learning and developments. So that's, I think, where we are again now. Did you have a question back there? Or? Oh, no. Okay. Okay, sorry. So that's a little bit more about how the standard of care adapts to changes. And I think climate change and a lot of the other risks, ecosystem crashes, and inequality and the effects that that have on portfolios and society, et cetera. This is all, we are facing different risks in different circumstances than we were back in the 20th century. So it's important, I think, to realize that the duties that corporate directors have also include a duty to balance short and long-term horizons, the same as, which is very consistent with what investors have as their duties. So this is an area where I think we've tended to not focus and stress this, but investors and corporate directors really have a shared sort of focus of their fiduciary responsibilities. And as a coalition focused on 7 generations out, I think you can see how this is very consistent with your approach to thinking about these issues. So the duty of impartiality is really one of the most fundamental concepts, I think, and this is on an international basis, especially when you're talking about intergenerational differences in interests and the ability to balance those. You can see the quote on the top here, basically that trustees should make diligent and good faith efforts to identify, respect, and balance various beneficial interests. And I think the UK, as an example of the UK and Europe being pretty far ahead of us in some of these regards, basically has started issuing legal opinions observing that fiduciary duties can extend to include things that have a tangible link between the investment and their ability to improve members' standard of living in the future. And in a way, it comes from, it's related to being able to keep up with inflation. But I think that one of the things that we're learning is that systems level risks are something that can, in the future, have as they are realized, the risks can really affect inflation and standard of living in the future. Also, I think a fundamental problem with the finance industry is that, as Nicholas Stern from the London School of Economics says, basically, economists have grossly undervalued the lives of young people and future generations and applied discounting in such a way that it's effectively discrimination by date of birth. Unfortunately, I think that's true, and it's exactly what we've been doing. And again, it goes directly to what this group is all about. So finally, and perhaps most importantly, the duty of prudence requires that fiduciaries not jump to conclusions or blindly accept assertions of fact, but make a reasonable effort to verify facts that are relevant to investment and management of the assets that they're in charge of for other people. Putting all of this stuff together, and I think this is one of the takeaways that I'd like you to take away from this session, is that if you look at how important systems level issues are to investing, and if you look at the kinds of costs and risks that many business practices and investment practices end up foisting on society, taxpayers, people, the general public, you realize that general market risk and return exposure is much more important to long-term investors than seeking the golden alpha or a return above benchmark that everybody's pursuing. And if you look at it this way, say there's a portfolio, you earn 7%, and you beat the benchmark by 1%. Okay, so your alpha that you focused 99% of your time on, that 1%, is only responsible for 1% of your return. The rest of your return, the 6%, basically relies on the health and integrity of systems, the economy, the health of people. And we are in the process now of having a lot of research that and a lot of thinking that's being devoted to systems level investment. And I think the panel is going to talk about that a little bit. And it's also happening in a situation where, 50, 70 years ago, institutional investors owned less than 10% of the market. Investors were price takers. They couldn't influence companies and practices that would affect the broad general market returns. That's changed. Now we are in circumstances where institutional investors own more than 75% of the market and have the ability to influence how systems level costs and risks are managed. And that's one of the challenges, I think, for faith-based investors as we move forward. So this is not news to any of you, but you all know that what has been the focus of so much stewardship activity, shareholder resolutions, and engagement are under attack. Shareholder proposals are being excluded by the SEC. Major asset managers have cut their support of ESG proposals over the last 3 years. It's gone down from 46 to 18%. The SEC is planning basically to further limit the ability of shareholders to put forth shareholder proposals and use that as a technique for stirring engagement with companies. So even, and this is one of the things that I think is particularly troublesome for faith-based investors, in that our religious beliefs are very much centered around us collaborating, doing things together as Christ's body in the world. And investor collaboration now has very seriously been under attack. So I think the last slide kind of presents what I think our challenge is for the rest of the day. And that's basically to give some thought and thinking and discussion to what are the tools that can be used by faith-based investors in the current environment. What's happening elsewhere that can be useful? What seems to work well here? And what haven't we been doing that maybe we should be thinking about? So I think the panel will kind of jumpstart our thinking about some of those things. But I'll stop and just see if you have any questions for me before we go on to the panel. Well, thank you very much for listening, and I hope that this is helpful for today.
Thank you so much, Keith. We'll transition now into a panel, so Keith, don't go too far. We'll have Keith back to join us, as well as Jake Barnett from Westpath, Dwayne Roberts from Dana Investment Advisors, and Sister Peggy Beam, Sisters of the Presentation of the Blessed Virgin Mary. So if the panelists could please come up, and you'll introduce yourselves. But thank you so much. To sharing.
Well, let's just start off with just sort of introducing ourselves to everybody. I know that a lot of people know you already, but there are probably some here that don't. So just kind of talk just for a minute about your different roles and what you've been responsible for, and kind of what your general understanding or interaction with fiduciary duty has been in relation to that role. Jake, you want to start out?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Jake Barnett. I'm the Managing Director of Sustainable Investment Strategies for Westpath. Westpath is the pension fund for United Methodist Church. We also do some outsourced chief investment officer functions for faith-aligned nonprofit partners. We manage about $27 billion, which makes us one of the largest reporting faith-based pension funds in the world. I say reporting because we think the Mormons have more money, but they don't like to talk about it. When it comes to my role within Westpath, the United Methodist Church publishes a document called the Social Principles. That's really the living values of the church. It's updated every 4 years. And my team is charged with thinking through how do we apply the social principles in a way that directly aligns with fiduciary duty? So it's kind of challenging it's working and partnering and challenging our investment management team to how they're thinking about asset managers. It's using our voice to engage with corporations, but increasingly right now, it's also engaging with our peers to really decide what is the right voice of asset owners to lead the course forward, because we think that now is a time where asset owner leadership and faith-based leadership is really needed. And it's also thinking about impact and solution strategy. So how are we investing actively in the future when it comes to issues like care for creation and affordable housing in ways that are also generating strong returns?
Dwayne?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dwayne Roberts. I'm the Director of Equities at Dana Investment Advisors, where I've been now for a little over 26 years. 25 of those, we've been actively working with Catholic clients. So I came at this world from a pure financial point of view, but the sisters put me on the correct path. And now we spend a lot of our time thinking about values alignment and how to take a more holistic view toward financial stewardship on behalf of our clients. So Dana is a registered investment advisor with the SEC. We act in a fiduciary role for all of our clients, and really it's conversations with our clients that help direct how we do that. The last thing I'll mention about my background is that I also serve on a couple of investment committees, one for a diocese, one for a religious order. And these questions of fiduciary duty and obligation are frequently coming up in those board meetings, and I suspect I'll comment about that as we go through the afternoon.
Peggy?
My name is Sister Peggy Bame. I'm a sister of the presentation of the Blessed Virgin Mary from Aberdeen, South Dakota. I was born and raised here in Milwaukee and was actually baptized in this church. So there's just a special feel when I come back here, especially. I've been with the Sisters of the Presentation for 35 years. And I've always been involved. I was one of those delayed vocations. I was always involved in justice ministry. And I think that's what attracted me to the Presentation Sisters, was their commitment to justice and their commitment to working for those made poor, especially those who don't have access to resources. And so that mission and that care for the poor, especially those who don't have access to resources, really planted within me a call. It was not just, oh, I'm going to now take this job. A sister preceded me, Sister Ruth Garretts, who you might be familiar with. She was giving a talk one day and to our congregation, and I just felt I started crying, and I said, what's that all about? And so I think that to be involved as a faith asset owner, it's not just a job to do, but I think it's a call to be. And that's really what brought me to this position, to be an SRI, Social Responsible Investment Coordinator for my community. And for, I don't know, almost the last 8-10 years, I've been in collaboration with SGI and couldn't do the work alone. Again, one of our mantras in our community is do nothing alone. And I can see why, because we couldn't do nothing alone. We couldn't do this work without collaboration with SGI to help move forward and impact corporations with our resources.
I wonder if, just want to make sure we're not getting any feedback here between the two mics. Okay, good. So I encourage people, again, when you have questions or if you have something you'd like to add, please raise your hand. And Peggy, you can elbow me if I don't see somebody that wants to comment. But given the topic of this conference, I'm curious to hear whether any of you have had fiduciary duty cited as something that has blocked your stewardship activities or other activities. I don't know, Dwayne, if you want to start off, if you've had any, maybe you haven't.
Oh, I have. Yeah, so I think the idea of fiduciary obligation is something that's misunderstood. Keith, you did a great job of outlining some of that. I look at, so I'm a CFA charter holder. CFA stands for Chartered Financial Analyst. It's an educational organization for financial analysts, portfolio managers, financial analysts, those in the financial investment community. And when I went to their website in preparation for this, looking at how they discuss fiduciary duty, it's really the two topics that you brought up. It's standard of care and it's duty of loyalty. And so these are not our assets. They're your assets. So when you hire us as a financial manager, we are hired to assist you in your job of stewardship. It's not our money. But frequently, I think my profession is guilty of having narrowed that interpretation of fiduciary duty in a way that misses the systems level thinking that Keith mentioned earlier. And we've gotten into a situation, and I see this with boards of clients and with boards that I'm a participant on, where fiduciary duty is essentially interpreted in only one dimension, and that one dimension is maximizing risk-adjusted returns. It ignores all of the other non-financial elements of stewardship. So, and this is where, again, I said the nuns set me on the correct path. We had a group of sisters who said, yes, we want to, we want a healthy retirement plan, but by the way, we have some things that we don't want to participate in, and we want to actually encourage some things, some corporate behavior that, addressing issues of a living wage, for example. Addressing issues of human trafficking in Southeast Asia. I mean, and now globally, but at the time they were really focused on some things that were happening in Southeast Asia. So, fiduciary obligation as a financial advisor is not limited to investment returns. In fact, that's the one thing I can't guarantee. I cannot tell you what our investment returns are going to be. But I can tell you what we can do to steward those. I can tell you I can use my training and expertise to help you deal with issues like diversification, the horizon mismatches, and other issues. And it should be it's my obligation to make sure that I am doing that. But if you want to put your assets to use in furtherance of other objectives beyond just maximizing your financial wealth, it's not my duty to tell you you can't do that. And I think in my profession, I've seen so many board members and others who have essentially even told people, no, you can't do that. And that's just an incorrect statement. So yes, I encounter that the objections based on fiduciary duty all the time. And in my point of view, it's because there's a complete misunderstanding of what the fiduciary duty really is.
Jake, Peggy, do you guys have any stories on this?
Yeah. I think sometimes our industry miscalculates where we are. I think we often speak in echo chambers with narrow views that aren't reflective of broader conversations. And let me give some detail as to what I mean there. We aren't in a conversation that's truly about legal fights. We're in a political fight. The accusations that are often being leveled against different institutions that are causing rollbacks are very rarely seen as having a lot of legal rigor, but they do have political pressure. They create a lot of regulatory risk. And so I think sometimes, I went to a organizing training because my wife does political and community organizing on the west side of Chicago with affordable housing. One of the things that they really emphasized is that there's a difference between trying to operate from the world as it is versus the world as it should be. And oftentimes folks have a lot of conversations about the world as it should be, but they're not gathering the common understanding of the world as it is that's going to allow us to gather the power to actually move in that direction. And so when it comes to some of the issues that we're facing on a fiduciary duty standpoint, one, I would say, at least I've sat in various rooms with global asset owners. The type of collaborative action I've heard about, I've never heard a serious investor express a concern from a legalistic standpoint as to whether there's an alignment with fiduciary duty in my 15 years operating in the space. So I think we need to understand we're having debates that are sometimes moving into broader public discourse. And so some of the language we're using isn't going to resonate in that discourse. Another example is you can have conversations that are about systems level kind of long-term investing. And I personally believe those are incredibly important. But don't go into those conversations thinking that just saying that in a world as it should be conversation is going to change the world as it is. The world as it is a discussion in which trackable data, backwards looking timeframes, having an ability to prove out that you're not taking on undue risk are all going to be more prominent as a center of gravity than an abstract idea about long-term systems level value that hasn't yet been proven out. And that's part of our obligation, is to prove it out, is to work on it, is to build the case for it. But I also don't want people to go in. I think sometimes we need to see ourselves in the broader context of the conversation and the discourse we're having that's happening outside of our rooms. Such that we're well equipped to make the arguments within our institutions. Because part of the reason that I've found success at WestPath moving forward on some of these issues is I have taken my most conservative board members who would ask me the most direct questions, and I've invited them into the rooms on some of the trickiest decisions we've made, because I knew that was the person I really needed to win over. It wasn't the Reverend from Seattle who's on my principals committee. It was the former auditor who lives in Georgia, who chairs our auditing committee. That is the individual that we sometimes need to steel ourselves against. So when we're having these fiduciary duty conversations, I think the theory is really important, as you were outlining, Keith. Also steel yourself for the practice of going up against those people within your institutions that have different views, and find out how to speak their language, find out how to convince them, find out how they probably have valid points, because just because you're considering long-term doesn't mean you can disregard short-term. So we're going to be holding these tensions between the world as it is and the world as it should be. The more equipped and adept we are at doing that, the more effective we're going to be at reshaping what fiduciary duty actually means and is understood within our institutions.
I think the language is a factor. When, as a person of faith, I don't think I never used to go to fiduciary duty. I guess I was raised in, being a good steward, or, caring for the resources that I've been given or that I share with others. So, I'm thinking, how important I think it is for faith investors or people of value to really ground themselves in why do they do what they do? Because we are grounded in the gospel values. And one of the gospel values that I come back to is to cultivate and till the ground. So to till the ground, cultivate our values in what we do, and also, to look at who our model is, Jesus, who was the grand influencer, who was the greatest example of fiduciary duty, who was totally selfless, cared for others, the common good. And I think You know, those kind of values, when we learn them early on, you know, then when you get into the financial world and you're told to do fiduciary duty, it's not a concept to be lived into. Rather, it's a way of life to guide you, you know, in all that you do. So I think, you know, language is important, and I think it doesn't hurt to maybe go back to our roots and really ground ourselves in what we do believe. I think we as women religious, you know, so many of our communities are coming to a point that we're talking about coming to completion. Well, our mission is going to continue. So, you know, that's almost a misnomer. But really, this has called us to a point where we're reflecting on who we are. We're at a point where who we are becomes a witness, and not only just what we do. And so how can we, that's a challenge, you know, even as fiduciary people who have fiduciary duty or whatever, be stewards, you know, how does it become a whole way of life so that it's just not, you just don't do it when you're doing finances, but, you know, that you're being a good steward and modeling who Jesus was, you know, being selfless in every way of life, because that also impacts the world and the economy and our investment work as well.
Thank you. Any questions at this point or comments? Okay. Well, I have a question. I'm curious as to what kinds of things in your stewardship programs have worked well for you, and how you anticipate or how you've been experiencing ESG pushback on the effectiveness of using those kinds of practices. What works well, and what are you worried might not be working well going forward?
Sure. So I would say something we're really focused on within WestPath is we're primarily externally managed. We've got third-party asset managers. And I think that one of the areas I've directed my team to spend much more time focusing is on engaging those asset managers in really consistent, systematic ways. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that those asset managers are actually highly responsible for how well we perform from an investment standpoint, whether they're taking into account the type of risks and opportunities that we think are important is going to impact in a very direct bottom line way our performance in a way that I don't have that same conviction for engaging a corporation, not because it won't impact the performance, but because we hold 5,000 different equities. So even if I improve that one corporation, it's one of 5,000. So it's not going to have a material impact to our beneficiaries in the same way that engaging our asset managers will. The other thing that we're really focused on in terms of engaging asset managers is they care more about us. And I would say that's true for all of you in terms of if you're comparing asset managers or in some cases consultants to the type of engagement you can have versus a corporation. You know, even us at WestPath at 27 billion, we own of public equities, it's usually like 0.005%. So in the case of a company like Chevron, where we're a Climate Action 100 plus engager, I am incredibly confident that they would be more than happy for us to sell because they don't want to talk to us anymore. We're not worth it. I've actually heard stories of much more significant asset managers. I was just traveling in Europe, and a significant European asset manager who's much larger than us had a US oil and gas company say, we know that you've flagged us for not being held in one of your index products. What do we have to do so we're not held by you at all? So they were coming wanting to have the conversation of like, oh, you're not held, but these are the things that you do to get hold. And they're like, no, we never want to talk to you again. And I think in some cases, that's the That's the posture we're going to be facing on some of these corporate engagement conversations. You will never get that response from an asset manager. They are much more directly tied from an incentive comp standpoint to wanting your business as an asset owner. There's an individual at the relational side. There's often longer term relationships. It's going to require you building partnerships within your institution, because ultimately your chief investment officer, treasurer, or CFO likely has longstanding relationships there. So you're going to need to partner. But I would say in general, for a number of years, we've been orienting away from corporate engagement towards more asset manager engagement. Not so much, this happened before the anti-ESG pushback. It wasn't so much because of that aspect, although I think shareholder proposals I've heard from a number of folks, and Keith, you were referencing, will be challenged. It's more so just we think it's a more impactful lever for where we sit within the financial ecosystem.
So Jake, listening to you, the word that stood out that I'm going to use as the segue is partnership. So as an asset manager, I think about some of these challenges from the perspective of partnership in a couple different directions. So I'll just was going to start in a different direction, but I'll start with what Jake was saying. Our best partners in this activity are our clients, and it's their direction and their input, their feedback, their guidance that helps us determine the path that we're going to follow in many cases. And so, Keith, your question about the ESG pushback, we've definitely felt that. We've seen that. We certainly see it on the engagement front. But in terms of the commitment from our clients, and particularly the faith-based clients, it's a non-event. I mean, our clients are not pushing back on their commitments to social justice, to environmental stewardship. And so, we're trying to look through this pushback because our clients have a longer term horizon and want us to keep moving in the direction that we've been moving. In terms of engagement, we're a relatively small organization. Our asset base is about a third the size of Westpath. And that's all, of course, our client money, not ours. But we discovered years ago that with partnerships, with coalitions, small voices are elevated. And so working with groups like Seventh Generation, working with groups like ICCR, the Francesco Collaborative was mentioned earlier this morning, secular groups like Ceres, PRI, they are able to amplify our efforts, which are just efforts on behalf of our clients. So it's our clients' efforts essentially, that we are the execution of their efforts, and it's in partnership with other organizations that we've encountered the most success. So yeah, those coalitions are challenged. The vote totals from the major passive index managers have gone way down in the last few years, and that's a challenge. But we continue to move forward on these engagement efforts, the conversations with companies, and the activities on shareholder resolution. I guess the one story I'll share in terms of similar to the oil company story that Jake just told, we were talking to, well, you named your company, I'll name mine. Oh, that's right. Okay, I'm sorry. All right, then I won't name the company, but we had a religious client who was concerned about one of our holdings continuing their operations in Russia after the Ukraine invasion. And we directly talked to the company for over a year and expressed our concerns and what they were doing in terms of trying to protect the human rights of Ukrainians and even of Russians who were potentially being conscripted. And what we saw over the 5 or 6 quarters that we maintained this conversation was that their business in Russia was actually growing. And they actually, it was a significant driver of the worldwide firm's growth. And we were a little troubled by this. And I think what eventually led us, quite frankly, to divest the holding was their CEO during an earnings call was asked the question, and his response was, our investors don't care about this. We had been talking to them for a year, and the CEO's response was, our investors don't care. So it is a challenge, and I think the current political environment unfortunately makes that kind of response more common. But I know, I mean, certainly the religious orders have been steadfast in their approach to this, and I know they will remain that way. So, you know, hopefully this too will pass, and we'll get through it. But right now, the pushback and from this anti-ESG movement is real and having impacts.
I don't know if that's the same company I'm thinking of, but I think our community was going to engage with them. And then I called up our financial manager, and he said, well, you don't have that stock anymore. We don't. And because, you know, sometimes we hold stock in some companies that you don't really want to, but you have it because you can have maybe some leverage, you know, in those companies. And so anyway, that was an example of, you know, we definitely exclude companies, and we also engage companies. And so on one hand, we were glad they divested of it. But on the other hand, you know, then we couldn't engage them. However, you know, it all washes out. So, you know, there was an example of, you know, there's no right or wrong here. You know, it's kind of a moral dilemma in a sense, you know, that we as asset managers or asset owners share. So, I just wanted to build a little bit on the partnerships too. I think religious communities and faith-based investors rely more and more on you know, asset managers such as yourselves. You know, we take it very seriously when we kind of hire an asset manager to make sure that their values align with our values. And so, you know, we make sure that, and so that's why we have Dana, you know, we have those kind of asset managers who their values align with ours, so that we can trust, you know, what they do with our money. And we know that they're good stewards. And so what we can't do, they will do for us.
Thank you. Those are all great points, all of you. And what I'm hearing from you basically is that it's important to think about engaging with your investment managers and your advisors, and to be very deliberate about who you're selecting for those roles. Any other questions right now from the audience? Yeah, Chris.
My voice is weak, so on your slides, you had a reference to McRitchie v. Meta. So the case brought by Jim McRitchie against Meta, Facebook, and the Delaware Chancery Court last year put out a decision basically saying that the board's, my interpretation was that the board's duty was to the shares, not to the shareholders who are diversified. And it seems like a court case like that took us into a misunderstanding of the kind of sense of fiduciary duty we're thinking about. I don't know if you all have some thoughts or comments or a way forward on that.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that, because while the court did say that, and the basic holding, I think, of the court in that case was not favorable to investors, there was also another aspect of that case where, you know, if somebody shuts a door, they open a window, and the open window was basically what I had mentioned, that the fiduciary duties of corporate directors run to long-term sustainable value creation. And that is another way to approach the same issue of you can't serve the shares or the company's ongoing success if you're not focused on developing relationships with your stakeholders and planning, doing business planning that provides for a long-term, sustainable, successful business.
Okay, so your work with your asset managers is that a matter of you're educating them on SRI investing? What is it you're trying to accomplish with them, and does it further the cause of SRI investing?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, our focus is often on topics relating to sustainability and material risks. So it's going to, I think something that we've been looking to adopt is differing it by asset class and by strategy. What I mean by that is, for example, if you're investing in infrastructure, large aspect of infrastructure is natural gas pipelines. So you want to make sure that an investor, and we actually wrote a blog on this that was co-authored by myself and our head of private markets, where we were looking at private markets infrastructure managers, and we basically got down to a finalist of 3. One said, we're committed to net zero. We don't see what role natural gas pipelines could have in that future. Another said, we have natural gas pipelines, but we're actively working on retooling them for the future risks that we see when it comes to transition. The third said, the technology will figure it out. And so we knocked out the third as the sustainable investment because we need the asset manager to take that risk seriously. And then we actually ended up as a team picking the first for a variety of reasons, but including that we thought that they had a good, strong, sustainable investment. Now, that's different than, for example, if I'm talking to an emerging market debt manager. If I'm talking to an emerging market debt manager, I want them to be really smart about geopolitical human rights risks. So that's what I'm going to spend a lot of time talking to them about, because the real risks I see manifesting in the portfolio are things like authoritarianism, corruption, etc., that are going to erode the creditworthiness of that asset class writ large, or that's going to be a more pervasive risk. So they are conversations about sustainability risks, and partially it's also partnering with, in our case, we have asset class leads for public markets, fixed income, and private markets. And it's talking to them about let us bring our lens of sustainability to teach you what we're seeing developing in the marketplace, and then help educate us, peer colleague, about how that's going to manifest within the investment process in ways that you have conviction are financially material. And those are really the questions and the topics that we're seeking to engage most deliberatively on.
Okay. I have another follow-up question. Have any of you been using engagement with policymakers as part of your stewardship activities? Jake, when we get down to when you get to answering this, I wanted to see if there are any takeaways from your time in Europe that you can share with us about what they are doing that might be different.
Maybe I'll hand it to Peggy and then I'll try to write those down so I actually have some coherent thoughts.
I don't know. I think we're not.
Anyway, so the question of policymakers, do you have any clients or any folks that are involved with engaging with policymakers?
So I guess the short answer would be no. We've done policy work primarily through public comment periods. So SEC rule changes or things of that nature. I know several of the organizations that we were participants in will do annual events at the Capitol where they'll go visit legislators. And we have not, at Dana, we have not participated in those. we have participated in submitting comments and doing that. We are shareholders, not political activists, and so our engagement is focused on the companies that we own. However, having said that, I feel like we need to be much more aware because shareholder rights are under such attack, and that's a political action, that as shareholders, we need to pay attention to the political realm more than we did 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And so will we become more, I won't answer that, but it's possible that we become more involved on the political front just because so much of this has become a political battle, as Jake alluded to earlier.
Yeah, and so we've engaged some with policymakers in the past. Something I was just talking about with my team is I still think that there's room to engage at the state and local level in ways that, Series just some of my team members were just telling me Series just hired a Midwest policy expert. So, I think that there could be, we kind of think about policy in a monolith, which is like engaging on industrial policy or regulatory policy at the federal level. There's lots of layers to policy. And I think that we need to kind of consider the tools that are in front of us. I feel like I started off on a bit of a downer note, and that's because I'm a natural pessimist. But I've been trying to challenge myself to be more optimistic these days as an act of faith and hope. And so I think some of the conversations I'll carry forward from some discussions at that I was having. I was just out in Geneva I serve on the engagement track co-lead for the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance. So they were having their annual general meeting, and then spent some time with some asset owners in London. And, the reality is that outside of the US market, it's pretty much full steam ahead on a lot of these issues. And a lot of these are multinational companies that we're engaging with. They've still got exposure to European markets. They're going to be impacted by some of these factors. China is full steam ahead on investing in transition and climate. There's plenty of kind of social and human rights issues to be concerned about. But when it comes to some of the green tech out of there, when I was talking to my colleagues, it's pretty impressive what's being rolled out. And there's investments in things that are really powerful in terms of stewardship and engagement. If you haven't already, check out the Mining 2030 initiative, which is led by Church of England. It's a multi-sectoral engagement on the mining sector, which is both highly extractive, comes with really, really important impacts, often negative externalities when it comes to environment and social, and is also incredibly important to any type of transition. So it's vital to the actual ability to transition away from fossil fuels, which is a really interesting place to be in the economy. And Adam Matthews at Church of England is a good friend of mine. He's doing incredible work there. Investors are engaging in policy within the European context, whether that's regulatory, industrial. I think there's still quiet policy engagement happening today in the US. So when I talk internally to my team, one of the things that I say is basically, listen, either at some point, the steadiness, especially that I think the faith-based have shown in their commitment, becomes a boon to how we're perceived more broadly in the industry, and kind of it actually becomes a really interesting discipleship moment for certain faith-based investors, is something we've been talking about internally because of that stalwart commitment, because there's a return to normalcy in this country. And I don't really like contemplating the alternative. I'm only working for that future in which there's a return to issues of climate change, human rights, diversity, equity, and inclusion being back considered in rational, long-term oriented perspectives, because the alternative isn't worth contemplating. So that's going to be the future and the faith and hope that I try to practice in some of these spaces. And I see it globally in ways that excites and energizes me, and that I would encourage you all to be buoyed by as well.
And I'll just say, I don't know that we have to think at a macro level, but I think we all could be, influencers of helping to create a more sustainable world and care for God's people. I mean, we all can do that in our own way. And I don't, not to negate or underestimate our own human potential to make an impact in this world.
Okay. Yeah. Any audience questions, comments?
Thanks. It's actually a follow-up question for you on your international and national contrast, because I feel hopeful as a citizen of the world, but not so much as a citizen of here. So when you talk about this quiet, how did you call it? Quiet advocacy that you're, can you just expand on how that's manifesting itself, or how that is taking shape, and the opportunities there?
Within the US context specific? Yeah. I mean, so I would say part of what happened, and my genesis in the sustainable investment space was actually one of the kind of seminal moments I think about was actually going into a church with Barbara Jennings in the Midwest Coalition for Responsible Investment. When I was living in St. Louis at the time as an investment consultant. And part of what I just loved about the feeling in that room and in these rooms, and part of why I still come, is the integrity that I felt. I wasn't coming from a faith-based background, but I felt integrity, which what I mean by that is I define integrity as the proximity of your beliefs to your actions. People were really trying to put those in tandem. And that integrity is not always present in the broader financial commercial markets. And so when I talk about specifically sustainable investment, I think some of what we're experiencing is that if this is kind of the reality of how people are relating to that topic in their actual actions as corporations and investors, when it was in vogue, they were overstating what they were doing. And now that it's out of vogue, they're understating what they're doing. But the actual reality has remained relatively steady in terms of I think I don't know, Caroline is having more conversations certainly with corporations than I am today, but a lot of times what you'll hear is we're continuing our DEI, we're just calling it human capital management or something of that nature. We're still doing climate, we're just not talking about it. And, I do think I've heard from some large asset managers that they are kind of speaking to different policymakers and to different forces to say, like, don't tear the whole thing down. We do need some of this. Now, the chilling effect is real, because sometimes people say, oh, we're just not talking about it, don't worry about it. And I'm like, no, not talking about it actually matters, because it makes it feel there's a vacuum of public discourse that gives greater permission for all this rollback. So I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but I'm saying I think the whipsaw we're experiencing can sometimes be larger if you're basing it on that discourse piece than the steadiness of how people are speaking into the system and what their perspective actually is when it comes to some of those bottom line considerations.
Well, hopefully my question sort of ties in nicely. And it's sort of two parts, and I want to appreciate the comments and perspectives from all the panelists and from you as well, Keith. So in this moment, what are some sort of suggestions or strategies that we could utilize as both a faith-based community, a socially responsible investing community and maybe one is sort of counter just on the messaging, so that public discourse around fiduciary duty and ESG and SRI and all the, sort of the alphabet acronym soup. But I think then also with that, Jake, I appreciated your comments about the work that you all are doing at WestPath to engage with asset managers. But thinking beyond that, are there, and I don't want to jump ahead too much to what's coming next in our program, but are there other allies or partners that we haven't tapped into in terms of relationship building, coalition building that would be really important in this moment? And maybe with that, like, are there strange bed fellows that we should be thinking about having those collaborative conversations just to understand where we're coming at from these different perspectives and trying to seek middle ground. So I guess sort of two parts, any concrete strategies, and then are there other partners that we should be seeking out?
There are definitely other partners. I mentioned earlier that our engagement is all built on partnerships. It's partnerships with our clients and getting their guidance and their direction, their input, their interpretations, but then partnerships with organizations that help amplify our voice. And one of the things that I think about, I mentioned the dialogue we had with the company operating in Russia. Dana led that conversation. We had other investors who participated with us, but there was a third-party human rights group that was involved in that. And quite frankly, they were the expertise. So we would not have been effective at all in that conversation without their backup and support. Not faith-based, I mean, just purely secular organization, but they provided us the expertise on the UN guiding principles, on a lot of data specifically on things that were going on in Russia and Ukraine at the time. And so those partnerships are out there. And I think we just need to be aware of and open to conversations, beyond just, our own communities with like-minded individuals and organizations, because everything we can do together amplifies our voices and makes us that much more effective.
Yeah, I just thought of something too. Since we're talking about what impact corporations have on people and the environment, I was on an engagement where people who were impacted by some of the actions of the corporation were on the call. And so their personal testament, I think, spoke volumes. So we can speak our truth, but to hear it from somebody who's being impacted, I thought that was so powerful.
I think when it comes to climate solutions investing, we're actually at an interesting point whereby because there was some kind of rollback of the sentiment for the marketplace, it's actually a good time to invest if you're because some of the valuation, which had become somewhat inflated, has come out of the market. So that's a good one to just bring to your CFO, treasurer, et cetera, say, hey, now is actually a really good time for climate solutions investing. That's a very concrete example that I think is a powerful one that we're certainly looking at Westpath in terms of how do we continue on and expand that practice. Really appreciate the examples that are being given about kind of bringing in stakeholders and perspectives outside of traditional finance and peer collaborations. I think that's a really interesting and underutilized area that we also rely, for example, on our human rights work on an external partner that's hugely central to our approach. I also would just say the voice, if you are representing a Catholic women religious order right now, your voice resonates within the ecosystem. If you're open and willing to use it to really kind of stake the ground of a lot of what Sister Peggy has been saying about the kind of the manner, the heart, the values of this work. I think it matters not only for changing public discourse, but also just for helping people see that that's real and that it exists and that it's something that they should be anchoring themselves. I speak from personal experience on that one. Seeing how Pat Daly operated is something that I routinely pray when I'm going into rooms with global asset owners to say, what would Sister Pat do? Because I was talking to another sister, Elise Garcia from the Adrian Dominicans, and she gave me the term, Pat's on my committee. So, I think offer yourselves to be on committees of people and be mentors, be guides, be voices. It's needed in the space. Including those of you, even if you're not a religious order, if you've just been in it, if you've got a heart for it, if you've got experience for it, like mentorship, bringing people along, speaking truth to power, all that's needed so much now in terms of shaping the discourse moving forward.
And I'd like to just kind of wrap it up here because I know that we want to move on to the collaboration development phase of the conference, which I think is incredibly, incredibly important. But I do want to close on one idea, and that is the observation that, in my opinion, I think that you have more rights as religious organizations and as faith-based investors under the current legal regime and interpretations of the law that have been coming out of the courts than you do as investors. So I would encourage you to translate into to use your faith-based concepts and explain to policymakers, to your advisors, and actually even potentially think about engaging some attorneys to put in amicus briefs in litigation, or to think about bringing litigation to protect your ability to express your religious beliefs on things like climate change, on things like health insurance and health care, on environmental issues, on human rights issues. Even if they won't listen to you as an investor, you are much more likely to get what you want as a faith-based investor in the courts these days. So I don't know what you think of that. That's, I'm a lawyer telling you this. So, people don't usually like to associate with lawyers and get into court, but I think it could be really effective. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you to the panel for sharing your insights and wisdom with us.
Thank you so much, Keith, Peggy, Dwayne, Jake. I think it was a very insightful panel discussion, and I'm very excited to introduce the next portion of today's event. And I'd like to introduce Reverend Cynthia Gerald from the Gamaliel Network, who will be walking us both in person and online through a workshop on coalition building. I know we've all kind of come to this with different experience, different jobs, different understandings of fiduciary duty. So how can we work together?
While Natalie's getting that set up, I just have to say, wow, that was an incredible conversation. And all I could think was, what am I doing here? You guys have the raw material. I heard so many words used in this conversation that are the raw material for building the kinds of coalitions, collaborations that we need to build to move this very, very important agenda forward. So let me just reintroduce myself. I'm Reverend Cynthia Gerald. I have the longest title at the Gamaliel Network, which is Senior Advisor for Funding Strategies and External Affairs. And the external affairs is all about partnerships with outside entities, and it's a nod to my previous role there, which was as National Policy Director. And so I get to keep all those things rolled into that title. Gamaliel is a congregation-based, multi-faith, multi-ethnic community organizing network. We are located in 44 communities or regions in 12 states across this country. Those of you who are here from this area probably know our local affiliate, MICA, here in Milwaukee, and you know our statewide affiliate, Wisdom, which actually includes 12 other affiliates besides MICA in Milwaukee. We have for actually more than 40 years. It depends on when you determine our start date, which was officially 1968 in Chicago. But we always speak from 1986 when we had this vision that what we needed to be doing was developing leaders who actually were claiming their God-given purpose, their God-given power to build the collective power that was necessary to participate in the decisions that impact their lives. So I want to say on behalf of Gamaliel, I thank you, Chris in particular, for the invitation into this important space. As you know, and we heard it in this panel conversation, the social, economic, and political landscape in this country is shifting rapidly. Authoritarianism, supported by the rising movement around white Christian nationalism, climate catastrophe, militarization of borders, inequality, and the deliberate dismantling of civil society, unionization, and social cohesion are on the rise, and they are creating chaos, confusion, pain, anger, fear, and so much more in the people living in this country today, and I dare say, living globally. That's why this topic of building coalition, especially across differences in fiduciary duty, is not only important, it's timely, and it is absolutely essential. We claim a very simple truth in our work, and that is this, that ordinary people who are organized effectively into community have the power to drive change to create the conditions for dignity, health, justice, equity, freedom, and so much more. And this has been the power, or the strategy, if you will, behind every great expansion of democracy in the United States, from abolition to women's suffrage to civil rights. You can name a whole bunch more, I'm sure, and also to the overthrow of violent and oppressive regimes around the globe. Things like the Defiance Campaign in South Africa, which was suppressed in the 1950s by mass arrest, but it reemerged in the late 1980s as the movement that ultimately ended apartheid. And I can tell you, they had an economic strategy in there as well. So I want to say a word about some work we've been doing for the last 3 years. Our model has always been, though we don't use the language of coalition, it has always been coalition. So on the ground, let's take Micah, for example, it's a whole bunch of congregations who come together in coalition around a set of shared values and a concern about problems that they see in the community. And so they organize together and work together, take action together to change the world as it is into the world as it should be, which was the big mantra of Saul Alinsky, who was considered the grandfather of community organizing. We've been doing something very interesting for the last 3 years. We and a bunch of other national organizing networks who are very concerned about the crises that I just named have come together and been intentional in building cross-network relationships in something that we're calling an organizing revival. This is a large-scale attempt. We're talking about 34 national organizing networks. In fact, this week in Washington, D.C., we will have what is called a boot camp, and there will be more than 1,000 organizers. These are not the leaders on the ground. These are the organizers for these groups who will be gathering to strategize and think about what the resistance looks like as we move forward. We are particularly concerned about authoritarianism, but we are concerned about a whole bunch of these other crises. What we have learned in these 3 years is that it's very slow and very challenging work. And we move, as we like to say in the Revival Coalition, at the speed of trust. At the speed of trust, but it's absolutely essential. So I've thrown out some terms that in the last few minutes that may not be clear to everyone, or they may even be uncomfortable to some of us. The first one is this idea of power. I can tell you as a former parish minister that people in churches cringe at the idea of claiming power. It's not because it's not, I come out of a Christian faith tradition, it's not because it's not biblical. It's just simply because we don't understand that it is a gift we have been given in order to transform our communities. So let me define it for you. Strictly speaking, power is simply the ability to act. Martin Luther King Jr. actually defined it as the ability to achieve purpose. And so we have, over the years, as Gamaliel, come to this definition that we use when we train leaders, and that is this. It is the ability to act in concert with others to achieve purpose. Isn't that the definition of coalition, or the purpose of coalition? Right. So the second term is organizing. And I'm often asked what I mean when I say that I am a community organizer. Even my mother still asks me what in the world that means. And instead, she tells her friends that I travel a lot. So I want to share a story that comes out of Scripture, again, in my faith tradition, Christian faith tradition, that for me has brought more clarity to that term. And I hope it creates a foundation for what we are addressing together today. You all know the story of the Good Samaritan. It goes like this. A man was traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. He's robbed, beaten, and left for dead, but a priest and a Levite pass by without helping. A Samaritan, an outsider to the community, sees the man, feels compassion, and tends to his wounds, takes him to an inn, and pays for his care. This is a very powerful illustration of an act of charity, and it's a response to the question that comes earlier in that text of, who is my neighbor? But there's an expanded version of this story that my ethics professor in seminary liked to share. The Samaritan travels the same road again months later and encounters another person robbed, beaten, and left for dead. Again, he sees the man, feels compassion, and tends to his wounds, takes him to an inn, but this time he tells the innkeeper that he doesn't have as much money to provide for the man's care. Some months later, the Samaritan travels the road again, finding a third person who has been robbed, beaten, and left for dead. He sees the man, feels compassion, tends his wounds, takes him to an inn, and tells the innkeeper that he has no money to provide for his care. So what do you think the Samaritan does next? He begins to ask the deeper questions about the social location, the lack of streetlights, the existence of blind spots on the road. He organizes folks from the community to build a coalition to pass city ordinances that remove the dangers from the road between Jerusalem and Jericho. And he and the coalition monitor the implementation and follow through of those decisions. The Good Samaritan shows love not for neighbor, not just through a momentary act of charity, but also through collective, sustained advocacy for the promotion of the common good of his community. Inherent in that expanded version of this story are some fundamental and meaningful organizing principles and practices for building effective and sustainable coalitions. And so I want us to take some time together now to begin to unpack those. We always, oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't even moving this. Talk about challenge, Keith. Okay, let me see. Okay, well, this is the lovely triptych by John August Swanson of the Good Samaritan. We always push the folks who come into our work to get clear on their why, know your why. I want to share with you a video that we use when we do an orientation for our national leadership training. So the stuff that I'm talking about are just these are little snippets from a week-long training that we do to prepare people to do this kind of coalition or community building. Let me see if I can actually make this work. There it is. Okay, let me pause it for a sec.
How do I know? A lot of people, when they think of the phrase, how do
Can I turn the sound on up here? Okay. And then one more time.
I know,
Thank you.
they always want to
Some of you may have seen this, I'm not sure. We have a good time with it.
put the what behind it. How do I know what?
There we go, thank you.
How do I know? A lot of people, when they think of the phrase, how do I know, they always want to put the what behind it. How do I know what I'm supposed to do? The question that you really should ask is, how do I know why I'm here? Because when you know your why, your what becomes more clear and more impactful. If you know, like for instance, people know that I do comedy, but that's what I do. My why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. So I can do comedy, I can write books, I can be in a movie, because all of it is motivated by my why. In fact, I have a new web series out called Michael Jr. Break Time. We probably just did the 6th episode. It's on YouTube. So every single Wednesday at 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode on YouTube of Michael Jr. Break Time. What it is it's me. I travel around the country and I do stand-up comedy, in case you didn't know. And in the middle of my comedy set sometime, I'll stop and just talk to my audience. And we've been filming this, and it's pretty cool. So we're in Winston-Salem. I'm gonna show you a clip from Winston-Salem. And I'm just talking to this guy in the audience, and he tells me that he's a musical instructor at a school. So I was like, all right, you're a musical instructor, can you sing? Let me hear you sing a song. So this is what happened at the last episode of Michael Jr.'s Break Time. Check it. So you're a musical director?
Yes,
Cool.
sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Wow. That bro could sing. You know what I'm saying? All right. Now, what you give me the version is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know which version I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now, right now I'm found, was blind, but now I see.
Let's go. Now. Okay, here's what I want you to catch. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what becomes more impactful because you're walking towards or in your purpose.
Okay. Reactions. Wow, is that what I heard? Wow, tell me more about wow. There's something behind wow. Can you stand up and just speak out? Yeah. Okay. Any other reactions to what you just saw? Yeah, in the back. Did you hear that? My what comes from my head, my why comes from my gut, and it makes this work sustainable. Yeah. Any other reactions you want to make sure you get out here? Yeah. You felt that connection to him. Okay. All right. How many of you did feel a connection to him as he sang it the second time? I mean, you'd be given context, right? Because had actually given context, and that's what drove the way he sang the song. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Chris. Oh, I know.
Bronchitis. The second version had, we'll call it soul. And what I mean by that is it was born from pain.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it is so, so very important in this work that we're doing. And as you think about what it is you want to build out around this work, that you're absolutely clear about your why in the work. Again, the sustainability of it is really dependent upon that clarity. And you've got to have that same kind of clarity with people that you surround yourselves with. So I want to dig in a little bit more into the why. And I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to put it up here. And then I'm going to ask you, it will say do it in threes, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to have you join with one other person to do this. And that question is this. We've got it off of the. If you could change one big thing in the U.S. tomorrow related to these crises or to anything that's going on, it doesn't matter. I've listed crises for you, but what would it be? If you could change one big thing in the U.S. tomorrow related to these crises, what would it be? Let's just hear a couple of responses before we break out. What's a big thing you would change?
I'd stop the immigration raids.
Stop the immigration raids. Who else? What else? Yes, Peggy. Have people talk to one another, listen to each other. Okay, what else? Yeah. Okay, change the tax law. Anything else you want to put out there? Yeah. There is an opportunity. Okay, yes. Act like Jane Goodall. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, we have become so divided in this process, right, that we can't find our way back into relationship. Okay, so what I want you to do, though, is now let me put this up and explain it for you. This is actually in twos. I'm going to ask you to talk to somebody, preferably that you don't know or don't know well. But what are the deep grounding values and beliefs that motivate you in your work with your particular organization or institution? Didn't you hear them up here talking about values? You could sense that there were values behind what they were doing. But what, if you had to name that value or belief in just a few words, what would it be? And then the other thing, and this is where it really gets grounded for us. What is a short story that you could tell about where those values or beliefs came from? They always come from our experience. They always come from our experience. Otherwise, we're just pontificating. So can you root it in a story from your life as you think about that value and why it's important to you? So find another person. I'm going to give you, I need to do a time check on this. I feel like we're behind a little bit, or no, we okay? We're good? Okay. All right. So I'm going to let you have 10 minutes total, 5 for one person and 5 for the other. Deep grounding values and beliefs that motivate you in the work that you are doing currently with your organization or institution, and a short story about where they came from. Do you have stories like? Do you have, let me. If you haven't switched over to the other person, please make sure you do. So, do you have a story like?
When I graduated college, I remember being
Thank you. Thank you. That. Let me see. Absolutely. Okay, are you at a stopping point? Are you at a stopping point? No, you've got more to say to one another. Okay, let's just pause for a moment because as I like to remind our leaders when we're training them, just because we haven't finished a conversation doesn't mean we can't continue it at another time and give it the space and the richness that it deserves. So can you close the breakout rooms? Thank you. Oh, do I need to do that? I'm having a hard time seeing the cursor. Oh, there it is. Great. Okay. So what was that experience like for you? Anybody? And we can mic you here. Do you have the other mic? Somebody has the mic. We can run around here and capture. What was the experience like for you? Did you learn something about yourself that you had not thought about before? Did you learn something about another person that inspired you or made you think a bit more? Who wants to share? No? Yeah. Dean, right?
I didn't hear the question. The question was. Well, the story that comes to my mind, because I'm president of an organization called Wisconsin for Environmental Justice, and we're working on that as a justice issue in terms of we want to pursue litigation against the fossil fuel industry. And of course, the reason I was asked to be president of this organization, so need to get better at saying no, I guess, is one of the short answer. But the fundamental thing that comes to my mind, and of course, we're dealing with both conservative and liberal people in this world. And certainly one of the things we've come to find out is the unifying thing that conservatives and liberals agree on with respect to climate change is how it's going to affect the next generation. They all care about their family and the next generation. Now, of course, it's a unique, go ahead.
So care for our families, right? Something that we hold in common. That's a value. Is that a value for you? And where did it come from? Is there a story that can you think back to your childhood, to a story that really brought that?
Oh, yeah, I can remember I had difficulty in my first 2 years of college, and my parents were pretty steadfast in their support of me for continuing on and saying, yeah, you can do this, Dean. So, keep at it. So absolutely. And of course, that's the kind of encouragement that I've given to my children and to my granddaughters. Right.
Thank you. So the value that you lifted up with regard to this organization and bringing people together is very much a value that's inside you. Okay. All right. That's important. Who else? A value, a story that actually helps us to understand where it came from. Oh, come on. Well, then answer this question. What was this experience like for you? Actually trying to dig in around your value and tie it to something, to your experience in life.
My story goes back to high school. I went to a school about 60 miles north of here, and it was run by my religious order. And our sociology and political science professor or teacher at the time, who, God rest his soul, was a committed Marxist or at least a social democrat. He was really very intentional about teaching us, informing us. Some would say indoctrinating. That's what my dad said. He was a Republican, though. But anyway, he one of the things that he did with us as seniors was he would take us on what he called a sociology trip. And it would usually be 10 of us at a time. And he would take us all the way down from Mount Calvary, Wisconsin to start in Gary, Indiana. And he would introduce us to a couple who had been raised in Mississippi and whom he knew from integrating a Catholic parish down there. And they had moved from Mississippi to Gary, and they would share their experiences with us of living under Jim Crow in Mississippi, but then moving to Gary and experiencing what they did in Gary, because they were both professionals. And then we would move from there to a tour of the U.S. Steel plant. This was 1979. So the steel industry was having struggles at that time in the U.S. And we went through the U.S. Steel plant, learned how steel was made, learned about the workers and the unions and things. And then he took us all the way to Chicago, where we had a tour of the Chicago Board of Trade, which was an entirely different experience. And then he would spend the rest of the weekend taking us through the different neighborhoods of Chicago, from the richest to the poorest. And then we would travel up 41 all the way through Evanston, Winnetka, Wilmette, all the way up to Milwaukee. And then he would talk about our ministries here. And one of the ministries that he exposed us to here was what was then called the Third Street House, which was staffed by Father Michael Crosby of happy memory. And so Brian Brown, he tied all this together in one weekend. And that was really what gave me my why, not only for being involved with this work, but also just my vocation.
Thank you for that. Yeah, these stories, yeah. Give me your value for, well, are you talking about your?
Yeah, my value is to protect people's lives. When I was in the late 70s, I was up in Brown County, Green Bay, working with older people, trying to keep them out of nursing homes, providing services for them. And that winter, there was a guy up in Peshtigo who froze to death because the utilities shut off his heat. I was working with older people. They needed to pay $30, $35, and they had 15. And I had to find the other $20. St. Vincent de Paul, so somebody else. That's what gets me going. I see this coming. I see this going in Arizona, where people are dying because of the heat. And what happens when it's 110 degrees in Milwaukee? And what's going to happen to those people who don't have enough electricity to have a fan? That's what drives me.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, these are rich stories, and there's so much more that can be drawn out of them. But the stories and the values are really important. They tie to the why. They very clearly tie to the why. And so one of the things, though, that one other piece of organizing that's absolutely crucial is this idea of relationship building. And you build relationships. And when you build relationships, you need to be prepared to listen to these stories, because you're trying to find shared values in this work. This is how you build coalition, around shared values. We use a language of self-interest in the organizing world, which I would take time to unpack with you, but that is a 4-hour session. So let's just use this idea of shared values. But you do not uncover those without engaging in very real conversations with one another. So let me go there. Whoops. There we go. I obviously did this backward. We use a tool that we call one-to-one. Some of you may have been exposed to those, but one-to-ones are basically, it's a natural conversation that happens with folks, but it's uncommon in nature. Now, the reason that I say that, it's because when we sit down together, if I sat down with you I took the train over from Chicago and I was seated next to someone. So let's just say it was you. What would be one of the early questions that you would ask me?
I guess if you were heading home or heading somewhere else, you know, if you were going somewhere for work or for pleasure.
Okay. Okay, and so that leads us into a conversation about maybe what I do for a living, right? What I do for a living, where I live, where I came from, maybe where I was born, those kinds of things. Those are basic informational questions about another person, and they're good things to know about other people. But the stuff that actually helps us to build deep relationships, especially in the work that we're trying to do, is going deeper to the values questions. Obviously, we don't. So you could ask me a question about where I came from, and you might, and I would tell you that I was born and raised in a small town in the central part of the state of Missouri. And you might ask me what it's like to grow up in a small town, which leads to a story, which leads to another story, and maybe to another story. If you're listening carefully to me, you'll have some questions about that, right? You might learn, for example, that in that small town that I grew up in, I was born in 1959. So in my small town, we had a railroad track that divided that town. And Black folks lived on one side and white folks lived on the other side. And this was post Brown versus Board of Education 1 and Brown versus Board of Education 2. And I went to segregated schools. Post Brown versus Board of Education. How do you think that shaped me? So that's a conversation that gets us really digging more deeply with one another and uncovering what we share in terms of values and self-interest. Okay? Does that make sense to folks? Anybody have any questions at all about where we're heading with this? Okay. Yeah. Mhm.
Forget exactly how it was worded, but it was a little bit intrusive.
Where I was from?
No, it's the question.
Oh, where am I from? I think some of that just comes up naturally in conversation. If you're seated with someone, there are some basic things that come up, right? I mean, you ask people what they do for a living, maybe if it is a work trip that they're on. You don't ask them, oh, which part? And that's okay. When we are actually building these kinds of relationships, we take a person's refusal to respond as their right. They have agency, right? So and we train people in how to do this, right? To have these conversations. They're not meant to be intrusive or invasive. They're meant to be signs of curiosity about other people. And they are acts of courage too, to actually get to know another person and their deepest desires and concerns. And it doesn't necessarily happen in 5 minutes, right? Sometimes it's multiple conversations. No, that's right. So let me say a bit more about these one-to-ones. I wouldn't do a one-to-one sitting down on the train beside her. What I am doing when we do one-to-ones, we encourage people to set these up on purpose. Set them up on purpose. Make an appointment to have the conversation. This is a person that you know in some way, maybe just because you are in the same organization, but you actually set these up, make an appointment, and you're honest about it. This is for the purpose of really getting to know who you are and what drives you. And they don't have to do the one-to-one with you. That's why we ask them first. But my point in the conversation I just had with her is that the typical things that we ask in conversations are basic information, right? A one-to-one is not like that. A one-to-one may start with some of that in order to, begin to ask other questions because they're revealing their history in the process. The purpose of doing these is to build healthy, dynamic, relevant communities based on common values and mutual self-interest. So, Chris, remember John Norton? Yeah. So John Norton, who is no longer living, was our director of training at Gamaliel. And in the Gamaliel culture, we really encourage people to become interesting people, right? Read, get to know as much as you can about all this stuff, right? Norton was the epitome of a person who was hungry for knowledge and interested in becoming an interesting person in the community, right? So John recommended a book to me. This is probably 10 years ago now. The book is called War, and it was written by a journalist by the name of Sebastian Junger. Some of you may know who he is because he wrote, based on his, journalism, he wrote the book, The Perfect Storm, which became a film about the whaling ship that was lost at sea off the coast of Massachusetts, I think it was. Well, in this book, War, what he is writing about an experience, and he embedded himself with the 2nd Platoon Company in the Korengal Valley in Afghanistan between 2006 and 2010. In the Kunar province, which many of you, I'm sure, remember from the news about the horrific, intense fighting that occurred there. The Taliban was very active in that region, but he was embedded with this platoon. And he got to know these folks. Thanks. Good organizing there, by the way, timekeeping. He got to know these folks really, really well. And then he also followed them back home when they left Afghanistan. And he did sort of these, they're not exit interviews, but conversations with these folks. And he kept hearing this over and over from these folks after they returned home. There was nothing they wanted more than to return to Afghanistan to their platoon. But it wasn't because they wanted to fight. The sense he got was you'd have to be crazy to want to engage in that kind of warfare again. But what he did hear from them as they talked about their desire to go back was about the relationships that they had with other people in that platoon. Relationships that were built on more than just knowing where a person went to school, what degree they had received, the economic level, right? Those kinds of things that separate us from one another became irrelevant. This became about your hopes and dreams. This became about life and death. This became about whether I could trust you to have my back and you could trust me to have your back. A different kind of community formed. It sounds pretty pie in the sky when we think about that kind of a community for a coalition, but at some level that is absolutely necessary. We have to be in this together, and that comes from being in relationship with one another. And we're not talking about friendships. We're talking about people who are committed to one another in order to achieve purpose. Okay. So that's the relationship building. Now, it can come from some communities that are intact. We organize the organized. We bring congregations together, right? Those congregations individually are organized. And so that allows us to bring a whole lot more people together at one time. But there may not be a community intact. You may be needing to think about what community you have to build. But it is about a disciplined commitment to resources and making clear that they have the potential to live out their values through the work that you're doing together. So we've talked about knowing why. We've talked about the values that drive our why, the stories connected to that. We've talked about the importance of building deep relationships. These are not like your best friend kind of things. These are relationships where people have shared values and a shared commitment to particular interest. Okay, I'm going to try to do this really, really fast. We also talk, so I mentioned power. We also talk about power analysis, and this is really, really, really important. And I'm just going to define power analysis this way for you. It's an evaluative system of the landscape or ecosystem that's relevant to the work that you do. You heard this one of these last questions up here. Who else do you, basically the question I think that you were asking, Keith, was who else do you need to be in relationship with in order to build out this coalition? So with power analysis, that's exactly what we're doing. Who else needs to be brought into the fold? Is it somebody just like us? I mean, the work that's been done on these successful movements that I talked about, you know, these are groups of people who are different in many ways. I mean, one of the reasons that we choose as Gamaliel to be multi-faith, multiracial, and I could go through a bunch of other multis, is because the diversity is what actually allows us to confront those who are holding the power, who are making the decision about the things that we want to actually change. Does that make sense to folks? You can't pit a white person against a black person if they're working together, right? If you got a, you know, and we see that. We see decision makers doing that all the time with us, trying to pit groups against one another. All right, so I actually had an assignment for you, but let me just quickly go through this. So I think one of the things you need to be thinking about is who are the decision makers that you need to be in relationship with? The question was asked up here about, you know, politics basically. And let me just disabuse you of the definition of that word. Politics comes from the Greek word polis, which in essence means for the good of the city, for the city, for the good of the city, for the good of the community is the way I often talk about it. The word has been co-opted by partisanship. We are all about politics, folks. We are all about the good, the common good in our communities, in our nation, right? So let's reclaim that language for ourselves. So who do you need to be in relationship? What decision makers do you need to be in relationship? Who are the people that influence the people that you need to make decisions? Who are those people that you need to be in relationship with? And then who stands in the way of achieving purpose? I think there was a question. I can't remember exactly how it was phrased, but this is really important. We do not attempt to work just with people who agree with us. The authoritarianism, the breakthrough of authoritarianism in this country is dependent upon dividing people who choose then not to work with one another because they have differing views. To build the kind of coalition that we need to move us into the future, into the world as it should be, requires us to think about who's standing in the way of that. And what kind of relationship do we need to have with them? It may not be the kind in which, you know, they're going to work closely with us, but we will have clarity about what we can move them to do and what we can't move them to do. And because they're in relationship with us, this has been our experience through the years, that you actually can move people who believe differently than you do, because people care about their families. We not hear that back here at this table? That's what brings them together. Okay. All right, so power analysis is really important. And, you know, this is the thing, and I really want you seriously to think about this. Who are the 3 to 5 individuals or organizations, but you have to figure out who real individuals are in those organizations that you need to focus on building relationships with in order to build out your coalition. Maybe in keeping with this panel that was just up here, you're beginning to think about categories of people, right? The policymakers, the electeds. What about you? Who was it that was telling us about a human rights group? Which one of you on the panel was talking about the human rights group that was? Yeah, okay. Yes, thank you. That you worked with a human rights group. Wasn't part of your faith tradition or anything like that. But there are groups like that on the ground who can really move things that you might not be able to move, but share your values around this work. Who are those categories of folks, and who do you need to begin building relationships with? And this is a really serious assignment, right? And then I think the last thing that I want to, again, this is a 7-day training. The last thing, though, that I want to offer to you is that you need to have a plan for developing these folks as leaders in your movement. Now, from what I see, I think you've got some great resources here at Seventh Generation Interfaith, and you have potential for actually leveraging some of that to do the kinds of training that you need to do with folks. But think about what folks need. I heard someone earlier talking or asking the question about, did you go in and actually educate these people about the problem? That may be what you need to do. But the leadership development is really, really important if you're going to build out a coalition. Okay, so I'm going to stop just for a moment before I wrap up with a couple of remarks. Does anybody have any questions? I know it's been a long afternoon for you, but does anybody have any questions or observations they'd like to lift up right now? Yeah. Yeah.
Are there occasions where one of the individuals or more might be within your own organization?
That you need to build a relationship with? Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's amazing. Once you start talking to people, there's a third way or a third idea that comes out of that, which can actually, I mean, maybe it's that you're bringing this person into relationship with you. But yeah, it's one thing to hold the line, right? But it's another to actually activate people so that they are moving, right? Not just holding the line in the role that they're in. I don't know if that makes sense, but okay. All right. I told you about this organizing revival. We've been reading a lot of analysis about authoritarianism. It's very frightening. And not to frighten you more, but when the breakthrough happens, at least what they've seen globally is it's 12 to 18 months before the takeover. So we're on a ticking clock as Gamaliel and the organizing networks and the work that we're trying to do. But one of the people that we have been paying attention to a lot is Erica Chenoweth, who is a professor at the Kennedy School of Business at Harvard. She is a recognized expert on these kinds of movements. And I just dropped a few notes to myself. I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but what she says is she summarizes this, she just simply says that nonviolent resistance movements, which is really what we're about here, right, require imagination and creativity. They require organization. They require courage and discipline. And I think based on what I know about you, through stories that I've heard from other people who've engaged with you, from some of my colleagues, from Chris, you have a lot of the raw material. This organization was founded based on the key values that can drive a coalition forward. You have a lot of what you need here. The question is, how are you going to pull it all together in an organized fashion, have a strategy that's actually going to build out your work across systems and institutions in a way that allows you to achieve purpose. And actually, I'm going to use the language of win this battle that we're in. So thank you all very much for inviting me in. And thanks.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, our panelists, and all of you here today. I think this has been a wonderful evening. It's still the afternoon. And I know will spark lots more conversation, community building, coalition building. We're not quite done yet. I'd like to introduce again Caroline, who will be presenting our Father Mike Crosby Award.
Thank you, Natalie. And a big thank you again to all our speakers today. It's been, I think, a really robust and interesting conversation. It's been thought-provoking. And I certainly feel a sense of hope coming out of it. So I hope that that is a shared sentiment amongst our audience. And thanks for everyone for being with us today. So yes, we do have one final order of business, if you will, although I think this is it's certainly a great pleasure as well. And that is to present the Father Mike Crosby Award to the absolutely wonderful Sister Peggy Boehm. And Sister Peggy, if you'd like to come up, please, you're welcome to. And so, yes. And so for those who are maybe not familiar, the Father Mike Crosby Award honors someone who has advanced a more just and sustainable world, carrying forward the passion and commitment of SGI's founder, Father Mike Crosby. And I think this goes without saying that Sister Peggy has all of those qualities in spades. As a bit of background, her deep commitment to justice goes way back, well before she discerned the calling to enter religious life. And in many ways, she has come full circle as she was baptized in this very parish and in this church. After earning a degree in computer data processing, Sister Peggy had an 11-year career at First Wisconsin Bank. And during that time, she also ran for state representative in the 4th District of Wisconsin and I love this, with the campaign goal to clean up the state of corruption, which I think is absolutely tremendous. And although she lost that particular campaign, her commitment to justice has very much remained strong and ultimately led her to become a secular Franciscan at St. Josephat Basilica, where she was called to mission work in the Sierra Madres in Mexico. You went from Wisconsin to Mexico. I mean, it's a big journey, and South Dakota. It was during her mission work as a secular Franciscan that Sister Peggy came to know the Sisters of the Presentation of the Blessed Virgin Mary of Aberdeen, South Dakota, whose mission to care for the poor called Sister Peggy to join the order in 1985. And that wasn't the end of her mission and justice work. After joining the PBVM, Sister Peggy put her previous political experience, even if it was very brief, I think to very good use via her work at Network, which is the Catholic Social Justice Lobby in Washington, D.C. All of these experiences and the very much unwavering commitment to justice ultimately brought her to her current role in leading the socially responsible investing work for the Presentation Sisters. I have had the immense privilege of working with Sister Peggy on the board of SGI, getting to know you, being graced by your very thoughtful leadership, your quiet wisdom, and everything that is very much rooted in love. And I think I have certainly felt that on the board, and I think everyone here within the SGI community has also felt that. So with deep congratulations and gratitude, we are very excited to present to you the Father Mike Crosby Award. I'm going to let Father John come on. A little bit of a
quite humbling when you're on the ground. I know, this is like the Academy Awards, so now they talk on and on and on and they say, when are they gonna stop? But I do want to say, the thought came to me, how they say it takes a village, but I was thinking in a little different terms. I was thinking it takes a family to raise a person. And we were just talking, I was just talking with my sister, and we were saying how important it is to grow up with those values, good values, because it sets you on the right path. But as I was reflecting, I just want to share 4 different families that are receiving this award with me. The first one is my baptismal family, which is all those who are part of the body of Christ. Well, and I just can't help but know that, with being commissioned by baptism, you're baptized to be priest, prophet, and king. And I've always taken seriously, I think, that call to be prophet. And I can see how that probably has grown through all my different experiences of family throughout my life. And with that, those graces really helped me live my call later on. But the next, family was the family I was born into. And I am so proud today that my family is here today. My mom and dad in spirit, but I have my brother John, who is my little brother, and his wife and their son, and then my little sister, Luann, and her husband, Doug. And they're all from the area, so I'm grateful. But all the values we were talking about, all the values that we gained in our family that help shape who we are. And there were experiences in the family that really plummeted my call to justice. I saw people who, kids who were kind of left out. And I remember, way back feeling sorry for them. And I say, they shouldn't have to walk alone, I'm going to go walk with them or something, And later on, that whole story of Emmaus story has become a part of who I am, So it's who we've walked with. And the other, this award also belongs to my religious community. I thank my community for the privilege of being able to do this work, and they're behind me 1,000%, and they're online right now. I think some of them, and and really, this is a privilege and an opportunity in religious life to be steeped in those faith values. Where I've been able to deepen my baptismal promises in a very unique and real way. So justice, now I kind of take on the mantra, I hope. I like to live into this. Justice is my way of life. So justice is my way of life. And I want to thank especially Sister Ruth Garretts, who also received this award in my community several years ago, because she mentored me into this and inspired me. So, many thanks to her. And then finally, my SGI family. And so I just want to thank all of you. And, Frank isn't here, but Frank he really helped me in the beginning to gain a little confidence in doing this work. But you all accompanied me on this journey, and I couldn't do it alone. And that really is, we can't do anything alone. We think we can, but we can't. So I am who I am because of who you all have been to me in my life. And then, why do I feel kind of queasy getting this award? You do it because you like it, right? You don't for the award. Well, on Sunday, that was my answer. On Sunday, with the Sunday reading, it said something to this effect. be faithful like servants who do their duty, fiduciary duty. So, it's not about recognition, but about being faithful servants. And if that's what this award is, then I accept it graciously. Thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you for leaving us with that, Sister Peggy. And thank you all for joining us today, both in person and online. For those in person, we will have a short reception following. We'll be bringing out some food. For those online, I hope you find yourself a good snack and a glass of wine or something to enjoy yourself too. Thank you again. And thank you for all of your support.